Welcome back to part 2 of the history of black films then and now. I meant to mention earlier that from the first part of the video at the end where I said stay tuned for part 1, I meant to say part 2, part of my little mistake. Now back to part 2. I like to pick up where I left off from the first part of the video, from where I had mentioned the word blaxploitation. To me, that so-called terminology didn't really make any sense to me. I mean, it's pointless. They weren't really complaining about white actors in white films, were they? No, because basically, they had made all the box office money of the 70s, like Clint Eastwood, Burt Reynolds, Charles Bronson, Paul Newman, and even Sylvester Stallone, which was really crazy. And as far as black actors, some of like the major movie studios, and what's even more frustrating was that the studios had actually made more money than the actual stars of the movies. That's crazy, wasn't it? Well, I like to talk about the beginning of black films, starting from the 1930s. I mean, there were some actors who had played some dignified roles, and some were not so dignified. In other words, some were stereotypical or very buffoonish. They're acting silly, making mockery, putting down, degrading. Well, some of them actually had to play maids, butlers, servants, even chauffeurs. And now I also would like to talk about one of the greatest actors of his generation and of all time. If it hadn't been for this man, there would be no James L. Jones, Lawrence Fishburne, Spike Lee, Morgan Freeman, Denzel Washington, Will Smith, and so many other actors that came after. None other than the late great Sidney Poitier, who became the first black actor ever to win an Oscar for the 1964 film Lilies of the Field. He was very classy, and he played a lot of dignified roles in certain movies. He refused to be in a movie that was very stereotypical or degrading. And I also like to talk about another actress, the late great Cicely Tyson, who had also won an Emmy for her portrayal of Miss Jane Pittman in the classic TV film, The Autobiography of Miss Jane Pittman. She was also in another iconic miniseries called Roots, which was very groundbreaking. Was one of the most watched miniseries in TV history. Now, see, if it hadn't been for Cicely Tyson, there would be no Angela Bassett, Whoopi Goldberg, Diane Carroll, even Viola Davis. And those actresses still stand today. As far as Diane, she was also nominated for an Oscar for her performance in the movie Claudine, which was another great movie of the 70s. But she had lost to Ellen Burstyn when she was in that movie Alice Doesn't Live Here Anymore. And another great actress who was also a singer, none other than the iconic Diana Ross, who was also nominated for an Oscar for her portrayal of jazz singer Billie Holiday in Lady Sings the Blues, which was another great movie, along with Billy Dee Williams and Richard Pryor. I mean, you know, there were so many other great films of the 70s. I could go on, like Uptown Saturday Night, Cooley High, Cornbread Earl and Me, Trouble Man, Gordon's War, Sparkle, Which Way Is Up, and so many. But as far as going into the 80s, in between like the 1970s and the end of the 80s, there were like two box office draws, Richard Pryor and Eddie Murphy. They had made many good movies. And the first movie they ever did together was Harlem Nights, which also had starred their friend, the late great Red Fox. Now, those are like three different generations of comedy. So basically, Some of the movies that we see now have grossed many, many, many billions, gazillions. Like Samuel L. Jackson, all of his movies had grossed billions. He was the only actor that had appeared more movies than any other actor in the 90s and 2000s or since. No other actor has done so. And there were like a few actors that had won Oscars too along the way, such as Denzel, Morgan Freeman, Jamie Foxx, and Will Smith. And we also had so many other great actors as well. Even Wesley Snipes. You haven't seen him in a while. Well, he kind of like fell off in like several years, but he had but I seen he had recently had made a new movie. I think it's called some strip joint, whatever. I forget the name of the title, but anyway, basically, as I said before in the second video, I think it's very important that we should acknowledge like the yesterday's actors because like they had paved the way for today's actors. Like I said, if it hadn't been for Sidney Poitier, there would be no Lawrence Fishburne and all those other actors that I had just mentioned before. And I also would like to mention so many other great actors that came in between. Paul Winfield, Robert Hooks, Glenn Turman, um, Ivan Dixon, Bill Duke, Carl Weathers, Calvin Lockhart, Harry Belafonte, who we had also lost earlier this year.